Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It is the final instalment of the IPL Power Lipshaw Index. We're going to talk a little bit about the IPL final, Sunrisers Hyderabad and the mighty KKR. We're going to talk a little bit of Mitchell Starc, a little bit of the Sunrisers outspinning Chahal and Ashwin in that semi-final. We'll talk about the player of the tournament and some parting thoughts on IPL 2024. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, this is the last. We'll talk about this IPL in detail. We are going to be in your feeds pretty quickly after this with a World Cup preview, hence the 1992 retro retro shirt. It's got the old vertical stripes. It's apparently slimming, but it doesn't feel that way. I've gone
the camera adding 10 pounds is your problem.
How many cameras are on me?
At least two.
Yes. But we're going to talk a little bit of IPL. And look, I guess, from a KKR perspective, and I've championed them throughout the course of the tournament, I'd like to say.
You mentioned that quite early in the show.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I did indeed. But look, probably you would say, and we might come on to this, deserved winners. I think 16 games played, including their post-season, if you want to call it that. 11 wins, so a win-loss percentage, I think, of 68%, if my maths is correct. A couple of no results in there as well. And then the Sunrisers, 17 games, because they obviously played one more game in that postseason, win percentage of 52%. So you've got to say, on the balance of the entire tournament, deserved winners?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, let's start there because KKR were brilliant. I when we were sort of mapping out this episode, I was saying to you guys before, I kind of thought we might talk through, the week that was, the semi-finals, but in the end, I think the final, the way that it was one-sided and even the eliminator or the whatever it's called, the one that they played against Sunrisers early on, which pretty much followed the same path, I think that the way that they played out is a great replica of their season and actually shows how dominant they were compared to all of the other sides. And, I think they've done a fantastic job and we'll talk about the ways that they've done that, I'm sure, as we move on through this podcast.
You mentioned halfway through the tournament, Binksy, you thought they were going to do the KKR fade.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah, look, I think we were talking about a lot of permutations, and there was two teams that, Rajasthan and KKR, that came out the gates pretty strong. And we talked all the way through the tournament about, could their bowling, actually match probably the explosive nature of their batting. And I guess when we look at it, it was the bowling really. When you look at the stats, they got 4 bowlers in the top 12 in terms of wickets. They got 5 bowlers in the top 14. In terms of wickets with, I think, Mitchell Starc. We'll talk, I'm sure, about Mitchell Starc in the World Cup preview, but we questioned his place early on, particularly off the back of going for a massive amount of money in that auction. He was
bowling terribly. I think
going off that, that auction, I think the highest IPL contract ever. But then, he's put in really, really big shifts into clinical, playoff stage victories. You mentioned that, Stu. Two pretty resounding wins against Sunrisers in the qualifier, and then obviously in the final. So whilst there might have been talk of a fade, I think that was the classic. That was a classic Binksy bluff, trying to do the fake to make sure they got through to the final stages of the tournament.
I think you mentioned Starc before. I think that is the place to go here, Baldy, and you to jump in because. I mean, he did it to Travis Head in that qualifier, and then honestly, the ball he bowled to Abhishek Sharma in that final, to knock him over. And we've talked at length about how good the Sunrisers openers have been and how important they are. For Starc to come out and do that straight away in that final, honestly, that was one of the best deliveries I've ever seen. Honestly.
And he keeps doing it in big games, Mitchell Starc. He keeps turning up to finals of big tournaments or, whether they be domestic or international, and he delivers miracle balls on the biggest stage. So, say what you like about his first 5-6 games of the tournament. The reason that he was paid $4.5 million was to come in and win them a final, and he absolutely got them off to a brilliant start against teams that racked up 250 plus multiple times during the tournament in the semi-final and the final. They bowled Sunrisers out for 160 and 115 effectively in the semi-final and the final, lowest score in an IPL final ever. So he was devastating, and this is what he can do on the biggest stage. And his legacy now is one of the greatest white ball bowlers of all time is off the back of, winning massive moments in multiple international tournament finals and now in a semi-final and final of an IPL as well.
We've mentioned Starc there, and he was absolutely devastating towards the end of that tournament. When it sort of really mattered, he actually, I don't think terrible was a strong enough adjective for how bad he was at the beginning of the tournament, but he came right. But it's not only Starc. This win that they have had over this IPL has been a complete team effort. You look down there, the team sheet, the Narines, the Andre Russells, the Venkatesh Iyers, the Shreyas Iyers, and I'm forgetting the English opener.
Salt.
Phil Salt. All of these performances, all the way down the lineup. It wasn't one person doing the job. They really spread it around, and Starc just put the cherry on the top towards the end.
While you're talking about bowling, I actually think that, Binksy mentioned it before, that I was leading the charge of, is this bowling attack good enough? And that was largely around Starc's struggles early on. Varun Chakrabarti took his time to kind of get into this tournament. Narine's been awesome throughout, but I think what actually pieced it together is those two young bowlers, Harshit Rana and Vaibhav Arora. As soon as those two became, I pulled out some stats for them. Before the season, the two of them, Vaibhav Arora had 8 IPL wickets out of 2 seasons.
Yep.
Harshit Rana had 6. So, I certainly, as someone who doesn't see domestic cricket over in India, I looked at those two bowlers and went, okay, like they might be okay, but these are not kind of match-winning performers. Arora took 11 wickets at 25. Harshit Rana took 19 and an average of 20, and they were your potentially, at the start of the tournament, your sort of 4th, 5th, 6th bowlers of that attack. And they rounded it out so well. And I think the way that they developed throughout that tournament, you could see that they grew in confidence. You could see Arora, straight away was someone who charged in a bold seam, but Rana was certainly someone who kind of developed his confidence in his slow balls and variations and things. And yeah, I think they deserve a massive amount of credit for, by the end of the tournament, they had such a well-rounded bowling attack, and that, complemented their amazing batting lineup so well. And suddenly they were just this team that could win in lots and lots of different ways.
Yeah, the other thing I probably want to pick up on, and we might mention him when we talk about contenders for tournament MVP. I don't think he'll win it. Was Andre Russell's impact as well.
Yeah.
Last year, didn't bowl his 4-over quota very often. Was used, I think, a little bit as a luxury. If we look at his IPL this year, really key wickets at key times. And I couldn't believe I had to go back and look at the stats again, but 19 wickets at an average of 15, but a strike rate of 9.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
And just seemed to chip in with those, those important wickets. He did it in the postseason, to use the American terminology. So look, really, really key. And then, I think we talked a lot about Sunil Narine throughout the course of this tournament. He was a little bit of a mulligan with the bat, wasn't he? And ended up with 480 odd runs. And arguably that impact was good enough on its own to have him in a conversation around how important he might be in the context of the tournament. But then also chips in, and you expect him to take wickets, and took 17 wickets. So it is just impossible almost to single out even 2 or 3 players, because there's 8 or 9 there that we've named that have had a significant impact on the tournament.
I do think something that sets them apart from the rest of the. Sorry, there was a pause there.
There was.
So I jumped in. Something that sets them apart from the other teams is the performance of their overseas players. That is where a lot of the sort of salary cap. I don't even know if the salary goes into, and they all stood up. We talked about Andre Russell's his line for winning games. He blew that out of the water, along with all these other guys. Salt. You can just go back down them again.
Salt, Narine, Starc.
They all stood up.
Yeah.
It was really, really, they were very consistent anyway to get across.
Lip, a word about the Sunrisers, because, I know, you've got the CD single. You've probably got a bit of merchandise at home. KKR deserved the win, but what are Sunrisers taking away from this campaign?
I think you're obviously not happy to lose the final, but I think you're pretty happy in terms of the way that they played. I think the interesting thing about them is that KKR and Sunrisers, I think if you looked at those two sides, they were the sides that certainly had the most aggressive intent with the bat. I think the numbers bear that out. I don't have them to hand, but I would say that the Sunrisers, what they lacked and what they might be looking to try and get in the course of, the next IPL windows and IPL, even just internal development before the next big auction, is other ways to win. We just talked about how KKR could, by the end of that tournament, they could win in lots of different ways. They could win with their bowling attack. They could spin sides. They could spin to victory. They could smash it with Salt and Narine. But also, KKR had guys like, who had underrated, I think, tournaments in Venkatesh Iyer and, Shreyas Iyer, who gave those openers the license to just go for it because they knew that they had this stack of batters behind.
Yeah.
And Sunrisers probably didn't have that balance throughout. I don't think, I was trying to think of throughout the tournament, I don't think the Sunrisers really ever won a game with the ball. They were always, and I think you saw that in the semi and in the final, the way that they played. They were thinking, we have to get to 200 or we have to push as far.
270.
Yeah, we have to push as far as we can, not because our bowling is terrible, because I think, again, we talked throughout this tournament about how the Sunrisers have improved their bowling and, guys like Natarajan and certainly Cummins throughout the tournament have improved and figured out ways to go. But, I just think that they didn't have ways to win in lots of different departments, and I think that's what they'll try and look at going forward.
A word probably from you, Lip, on Abhishek Sharma, and then should we come to Baldy for just a little bit on Mr. T Head as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, Sharma, yeah, as I said before, he got an absolute peach in that final, but he had an amazing season. We kind of touched on it there, some of the sort of key performers of the season, and for him to finish the season with a strike rate of over 200, and I think he's in the top 10 run scorers, I believe.
484 runs.
How many times did he face 30 balls in the tournament? I don't actually think he faced 30 balls in any of his bats. It's something like that.
It's going to take me about 14 minutes to find that out. Yeah.
Don't bother researching it. I'm sure someone will know. But I think it's the most runs scored without facing more than like 35, 40 balls at any stage.
And is that a good stat or a bad stat?
You tell me. That's the thing with Abhishek Sharma and Travis Head, is that they've turned the kind of role of one of the openers batting long into the innings on its head a little bit. And they've gone, well, actually, if we can be 100 runs at the end of the power play in 6 overs, that's kind of our job. That's our job done. And he's had 42 sixes, Abhishek Sharma, in this IPL tournament, most of all time. That the guys in the Sunrisers team, like him, like Nitesh Kumar Reddy, there are others, have had absolute breakout seasons for Sunrisers, and they've really outperformed their auction number as far as I'm concerned.
Can I put a question to you, Baldy?
You can.
So we're talking about these two, Abhishek Sharma, Travis Head, like they're basically Kalu and Jayasuriya on steroids, right? They're the version 2.0. Is it the way to bat going forward? Because it kind of went back in 96. That's kind of kickstarted where we are today.
Yep.
Is this the way to do it? Because you can see that they were, even throughout the tournament, there was a little bit of inconsistency with their batting. Mm-hmm. They've obviously had, people throwing out the word choke here. I don't think they did choke. I think things just didn't go right for them on the day.
Yep.
But that's the thought process. Is this the way to do it?
The challenge is twofold. First of all, it's much, much easier to do if you have the impact player rule and you've got an extra batter that you can carry in your lineup. 8 is a much, much bigger number than 7 as far as batters in a T20 tournament are concerned, particularly in terms of the amount of partnerships that you can put together. So that's aspect number one. Aspect number two is batters can win you regular season games, bowlers win you tournaments, as far as I'm concerned, and bowlers can win you finals. And the challenge that the Sunrisers had is they didn't have enough strike bowlers in their lineup, even though they had Bhuvi Kumar and Cummins and T Natarajan. They didn't have a strike spinner to be able to balance their attack. So it put all the risk on Abhishek Sharma and Travis Head, and they didn't come off in the final. You asked the question, is this the way to go? I think it is absolutely the way to go in the regular season. Come finals time, though, the game slows down a bit and it changes. The risk reward is much, much higher in a final, and I think you've got to play a little bit not more circumspect, but someone's got to play a match-winning innings in that top. And neither Abhishek Sharma nor Travis Head were able to do it, mostly because one or two of them got a really good delivery. It's up to the other one to then go, shit, well, now I need to bat for 10 overs rather than continue to go. So that's my slightly reserved, risk-averse way of saying I think there's an adjustment to make come finals time.
Well, I think picking up on that, and it sort of goes back to the point I was trying to make before, that I think the Sunrisers realised the way for us to win this tournament is to just keep going. And so, if they lost wickets early on, I think that is what they'll look at. They'll go, okay, well, we lost wickets early on. We're going to keep going. Now that means we need to build out some of this middle order. And look, they did. I think they found Nitish Kumar Reddy, performed really well. They've obviously got Klaasen, who had his moments throughout the tournament, played an unbelievable shot in one of these games. I think it was the Rajasthan game, played that back foot, hit it over cover for 6 off, I think maybe off Chahal. It was an unbelievable shot. He's going to be, a huge feature for South Africa, I'm sure, going into the T20 World Cup. But yeah, I think that they'll probably want, as much as we thought KKR had all of these unsung heroes that performed really well throughout their middle order, I don't think we kind of had that for the Sunrisers. And again, it's sort of, if those openers didn't perform, suddenly it meant that, you didn't have the firepower to carry on and put a total on the board.
This final was made for Tripathi and Markram to make big scores in that middle order because they needed to bat long in the innings, and both of those guys could do that. Neither of them managed to do it. They soaked up a lot of balls, and then it made it really hard for them to put on a big score on at the end of the game. So, there are guys in the team who can do it. I just think the top 6 didn't really stand up in the final, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah. And the bowling stood up for KKR.
100%. Absolutely.
And I think, to your point, Baldy, around bowlers winning your games, if a bowler gets 3 for at the top of the order, it's almost game over. Yep. A batter needs to get 130, 140 off 60 balls to match that, and that's not going to happen very often. We're going to see 70 or 80 off 40 quite often, and to your point, that's going to win you plenty of games in the regular season, but pressure of a final.
But before we move on to like players of the tournament and maybe thoughts about the IPL in general, it's a question for any of you that might want to answer it, but also might be more for Indian listeners and viewers kind of that have a better sense of this. Gambhir. So Gambhir is obviously a mentor, I think is what they call it, for KKR. He's been given a lot of praise, I think, after this tournament. I've seen a lot of articles now coming out. He's the architect behind putting Narine up the order. And his name is being floated out there as, Indian coach, the next Indian coach to follow Rahul Dravid. I'm fascinated to see what people think about that, because he's been a very divisive figure, I think, for over the last couple of years. It seems like if, he might be in some spats with people. It doesn't seem surprising every now and again when you see Gautam Gambhir having a heated conversation with someone. So I'm fascinated to see how he might, if he goes, go and take that role, how that might all play out, because it seems like he's an incredibly different character to Rahul Dravid.
He was also involved, if I'm not wrong, in KKR's last 2 titles as well. He was around the scene when they won, 2014, the last time they won it. And I think they won it early doors, like 9, 10, 11, when Ponting was around as well. So he has form in terms of getting sides successful in tournament play. But I think it's very, very different galvanizing a team that you can pick and mould and auction and craft versus having to put together the best 15 players in the country and getting them to work together, because you don't necessarily get to, you don't get to choose, but there's external forces working on who you get to pick in your team, and balance is a different conversation at international level as opposed to domestic level.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. Rahul Dravid, I think we look at how he played, and I think he's carried through probably the calmness from the way that he played cricket. As an individual, as coach of India, he's been pretty unflappable. He's been under a lot of pressure at times, even though India have been pretty successful, to be perfectly honest. But every time you don't win a World Cup, particularly when it's on home soil, the pressure comes on. There's always talk of when he's going to go. But when you then also look at who India have had coaching, it has been some of those divisive figures that have been involved from either a management perspective or from a coaching perspective. I'm thinking of the likes of Saurav Ganguly's been involved from an administrative and a coaching perspective. Someone like Ravi Shastri, you actually need a little bit of that personality, that gumption, Whether he's quite a big enough player as Shastri and Ganguly probably were to actually get by with that, I don't know. But again, there's a little bit of the McCullum effect there, isn't there? In terms of, this buzzword of creating an environment. And it seems as if the KKR had a lot of fun. And if he was someone that, I guess, facilitated that seems to be, the way that a lot of international teams now want their coaching setup to work. None less than Australia, who wanted to get rid of someone very, very intense and bring in a facilitator.
Totally. Absolutely right.
Okay. Yep. Raj, anything to add?
Just that I think that the IPL is a very different beast compared to international cricket.
Yeah.
I do think that his passion, his fire, would actually add something to the Indian environment. You look back at these great series that they've played and won. The last one I can think of is the Australian one in Australia. There was a lot of fire in that. Them wanting to go there and win. Has it been missing from any side that has been successful? Like, you look at the great Australian sides back in the day, the great West Indian sides back in the day. They all had this passion and fire. Maybe it's been lost a little bit in the Indian dressing room. I don't know. So maybe it is a way to go.
I think though with Gambhir though, and it's often a case of those impassioned, fiery coaches. You think about Ricky Stewart in rugby league. You think about a very demonstrative type coach in American football or American college sports. They tend to get the best out of their role players because role players get fired up and play like heat check kind of players. You have a look at the guys who've succeeded for KKR this year. A lot of them, other than maybe like the Dre Russes of the world, are the role player type guys who've had outstanding seasons. Venkatesh Iyer is probably a role player in that KKR side. Narine traditionally has been a bit of a role player. That he's got the most out of those guys. I wonder if he would be able to get the big egos of the star level players to come together. I think that's the hardest part. And where you see guys that are calmer, the Greg Popoviches of the world, the Wayne Bennett's of the world, the guys who understand the man and are a lot calmer personalities tend to get the big names to come together a little bit better. So it'll be really interesting to see, what kind of coach he proves to be should he get a shot at the international level.
Fantastic. Viewers and listeners all around the world, please pop who those people are in the comments for me down below because there's some sporting references are Popovich.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. What's he do?
He's coached the San Antonio Spurs for the best part of 30 years.
Right.
Pretty successful.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Shall we move on and I guess think of the tournament as a whole? So firstly, let's talk about the turquoise cap. So we know the orange cap winner was Virat Kohli. I think it's Harshit was the purple cap winner.
Yeah, 2 from RCB. Eh?
But yeah, before we probably come on to fixing the game and whether or not the impact player worked and was the tournament too long, let's start with a bit of levity. Who's got the turquoise cap, Raj?
It was a lot. There was a lot of sixes. I don't even know what the final count of sixes was.
It must have been almost 1,000, if not more.
Yeah.
Massive, a million. The one I'm going to stick with, and mainly because I missed the latter part of a lot of the IPL, but the one that stands out to me is Marcus Stoinis' 6 in the 100 that he scored. I heard it just landed somewhere.
Oh wow!
About 5 weeks later, but no, that was a great 6. But really, how many good 6s were there in the tournament? It was
1,260.
It was a feast of batting, but that one particularly sticks with me.
Fantastic. Let's have some parting thoughts. We touched upon the impact player role. Interesting that there's been quite a lot of conjecture I've listened to leading into the World Cup, which we will preview in your feed over the course of the next few days as well. So listen out for that. But opinion divided as to whether or not this is good for T20 cricket. Our views, should we start left to right or should we start right to left?
I mean, my face is right next to the microphone, so I'll just keep talking. I actually think it's fun for a domestic franchise or for a franchise league. I wouldn't want to see it in international cricket. I do think I think that it has its positives in that you obviously get more bites at the cherry, as you guys were talking about before. You get basically an extra batter or an extra bowler if you're using it in that way. You can, some teams have used it better than others. Some teams have had to use it as a bailout. Some teams have been able to actually use it for an aggressive purpose to actually get the best out of their side. But I think at the end of the day, what I love about the best sides is that they find balance, and I think that you maybe, I don't think you're going to lose the all-rounder, because the all-rounder is still going to be important, but I think that it takes away the need for an all-rounder. And I think when we go and look at this T20 World Cup, some of these sides that have all-rounders that can contribute, actually, the way that it helps their squad building is huge. And I think that having an impact player means the need for those players is reduced. So, yeah, I don't know. I can see both sides, but I would say, yes, let's stick with it for a franchise tournament, but not for international cricket.
I personally don't mind it for the shortest form of the game. A little bit of festival atmosphere, but still quite serious on the result that we want. I think it's a nice tool that, levels the playing field a little bit in terms of, I'm thinking this, 2020 tournament we're going into now in the World Cup with 20 teams. We've got Netherlands versus a superpower maybe. It gives them the option to play a little bit more with the strategy. It's not just that sort of on the field stuff. So I don't mind it. It's another tool, but obviously it has its place in cricket in my head. I think it needs to stay in the shortest form.
Borden? I don't like it. I don't like the impact player rule. It feels to me a little bit like DRS in Formula One. It's a problem. It's a solution to the wrong problem. It's the wrong solution to the wrong problem. If the problem is that we need to create more exciting cricket, then let's create more exciting cricket. But all we've done here is create a formulaic approach to maximum attack for as many balls of the 120 balls as we can. And what it's done is it's devalued the contributions of some tremendous cricketers that don't necessarily hit the ball out of the ground every single time. No Steve Smith, no Kane Williamson, no Joe Root. Tremendous cricketers now don't have as much of a role in T20 cricket in this franchise type setup, because they don't play the same way that Abhishek Sharma or Phil Salt or Travis Head or Sunil Narine does. So I don't think it's solving the right problem, and I think it creates a little bit of a one-dimensional approach to T20 cricket. I actually think it might work better in 50-over cricket, where the impact player could spice up the 20 to 35 over part of the game, where you're trying to conserve resources for a big push at the end. So an extra batter in that circumstance might work a little bit better. But I think
they tried that, didn't they?
They tried. It didn't really work. But I think that Raj is right. And in that, I don't like it for international play, but I do think it potentially has a place somewhere in domestic T20 tournament play. But I just don't like the way that it panned out for this IPL, because it just felt like a home run derby to me.
Do you think that its application might be different outside of the IPL, in that it feels like the IPL is almost its own sport now, the way that it's being played?
I think that's entirely possible. I'm really glad that it's not in this T20 World Cup. I wouldn't have liked to see it apply in the West Indies in /USA tournament at the international level. But yes, I think it would get applied differently based on the skill level of the people that are playing, right? You get great squads in the IPL, you get very explosive batters in the IPL. Maybe tournaments with not quite as deep a squad sets are going to have a different, view of that impact player rule. And you might get more all-rounder impact players because you just don't have the squad depth.
Yeah. And, I've kind of tried to sum it up, and I think it might make for higher scores, but I don't think it makes for better games. I'd rather see, and this is, and I get why the IPL want to see sixes, because they've got the, fire cannons, and they've got the dancers, and they've got the razzmatazz. And clearly it's that sort of short term. It's almost like your notification symbol on your Apple iPhone, isn't it? It's that hit of dopamine that there's another six. I would rather see a number 7 or 8 grind out, 40 off 35, and then allow, 8 or 9 to come in and maybe put a bit of fireworks at the end of an innings, and have a game that's, 170 plays, 165, rather than, everybody blast their way to 200s. And absolutely wouldn't want it in the World Cup, because I think it will detract from the development of all-rounders, and it will probably detract from the development of spinners, because they're just going to get step and fetched by someone with.
I mean, honestly, the IPL. We just talked about the impact of the impact player here. The IPL. You look at that economy rate chart, it is full of spinners. All the spinners have been able to dominate, regardless of what's going on.
I've opened a can of worms.
I just mean, I think that's the first place that people go, is that spinners are going to get tanked. And I think in this IPL, it's actually played out the opposite way.
And in fairness, when T20 came around, everybody thought that spinners wouldn't play and they'd get bazookaed everywhere. And it hasn't been the case over 20 years of franchise cricket now. And what about the tournament formats? So 14 group games, round robin games, and then followed by the qualifier, the eliminator, and then the final. What do we think around the length of the window? It's probably exacerbated by the fact that we've got a T20 World Cup and we've 100%. Seen some players leave early because of that. But tournament format and the window for the IPL, what do we think?
I guess there's a number of ways to look at it. I think for the tournament, I actually don't mind the length of it. I watched a lot of the IPL. I fell away towards the end because I couldn't. Some other stuff going on, but for the length of the actual tournament, I didn't mind the 14 games each. However, we've seen that it's taken a lot away from international cricket, and now that we're going into this 2020 World Cup, there's no way I'm going to watch every game of this 2020 World Cup after watching as much of the IPL as I did.
Yeah.
For the tournament, great. For world cricket, maybe it needs to be a little bit shorter, have that window a bit shorter so we can see some more international cricket in that space.
Can I know you have some thoughts about the tournament, how we frame the tournament. So let's come back to those. But maybe, Baldy, since you haven't commented just now, can I frame it in a different way in that it's clearly an important part of the international calendar. And I think, for the IPL organisers, I would think they would say, this many games, we get huge revenue from these games. We have huge interest. We've got great crowds. I would love to know what the players actually genuinely thought, whether they thought it was too long. I think you're not going to get that many honest answers from people who are, a lot of those people, that's their biggest paycheck of the year. So they're not going to, aggravate for anything being shorter necessarily. But I'm fascinated more from a point of view that this is a global tournament, I think now. And I think the hope probably, if I was sitting there in the IPL, I'd be saying, we want this to be the tournament that everyone around the world pays attention to. And I think they're getting there. They've certainly got us here, 4 guys here sitting here in New Zealand that have paid a lot of attention to this tournament. But how do they get the fan engagement for long enough for us to care? And how do we care about the players and, all of the stuff that kind of goes with franchise? They're obviously trying to expand that to South Africa and, into the Emirates and things like that. But I think that's where I'm like, okay, we've got to a point where this is such a crucial part of our international window. We have this connection to international teams because of where we're born or where we live or whatever. How do we kind of generate around the world connection, like for lifelong or at least some extended level of time to these IPL franchises? Because I think that's the next step to it not mattering that this is an Indian tournament. This is becoming a global tournament.
I think you've successfully answered your own question there, Stu, in terms of the way in which people follow football, for example, which is the pinnacle of club first, country second, except for international tournaments like the Football World Cup or to a lesser extent the Olympics. People follow their club. And that's because their club season across just about every major club season around the world, but particularly in European football, has multiple competitions. So I think the ultimate goal of the IPL is not just to have an IPL that's a league tournament with finals, but to have the IPL knockout competition where they build in some, like the basketball has done in America this year, Adam, an in-season tournament where they've got some kind of knockout contest. So creating multiple trophies, multiple championships within the IPL window space is one goal. And then you've also successfully answered your own question, I think, in terms of the way that they want to dominate globally, which is to have affiliated and sister franchises play all throughout the world, which will lead to multiple contracts or long-term multi-year contracts for a Mitchell Starc, for example, to play for Kolkata in the IPL and then to play for the affiliate team in South Africa when it's their tournament, and then to play a little bit of Caribbean Premier League for the affiliated team there. And that's the multi-year deal that he plays in those tournaments. But I think they've got to be a little bit careful in that they will need to make sure that the IPL is still a showcase, right? They can't have the other tournaments be too successful, because that, might take away from the golden jewel and the crown that is at the moment, the cricketing IPL being the pinnacle tournament from a domestic point of view.
Yeah, look, I don't think we're going to necessarily answer this question. I think the tournament's too long. I think there's so many things that feed into this. I think when you look at it being 14 games, that's not playing every team home and away. So that isn't, the integrity of fairness isn't one of the parameters of this. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that everybody plays everybody multiple times at home and away, because you're only playing 14. Yeah, 14.
There are very few leagues around the world that actually achieve that goal, right?
Exactly. So I think what I'm saying with that, Baldy, is you can change this to 2 groups of 5 teams or 6 teams if you expand it. You could change it to play 9 games each rather than 14, and still have an extended final series and shorten the window. I think if I kind of look at it, the Big Bash tried to expand and then had to retract. I don't think the IPL will necessarily need to do that, because I'm sure their revenue model is, we're going to continue to sell the TV rights. The bit that doesn't really sit easy for me, and there's a little bit of a double-edged sword here. They are giving some opportunities to people from associate nations. So, we've seen Irish cricketers, we've seen Afghani cricketers. We've seen, the opportunity for guys to get a decent payday. But we're not seeing Pakistani cricketers, and we're not seeing Indian cricketers play in other franchise leagues. And then, for me, then Indian cricket and the BCCI, who own the tournament, are taking a massive amount of money from the IPL, and they're saying we need a window for this, to the detriment of international cricket. And we also want maximum revenue out of an international cricket window, and they take about 40% of all of the revenue from the global rights deal from an international cricket perspective. Now, they've got that power at the moment.
Well, they'll say they earn 70% of it, or whatever that number is. Yeah,
absolutely. So they've got a very, very strong argument. But then I think we're going into a 20-team World Cup now, with a bunch of other associate nations. And I think if you kind of look at that, probably from, I don't know, 15 or 16 on that list of associate nations, probably down to 50 or 60. It's relatively close. And some of that, we've seen how quickly we'll talk in our World Cup preview, I'm sure, about how quickly someone like Nepal have developed, for example, and the potential that, Afghanistan came in and did more quickly than Sri Lanka or more quickly than Bangladesh, in terms of coming to, to be a fully fledged, you're not surprised when they win games at world tournaments. I think we need to answer that question of how do we get more money into those associates, and it can't be that we've got a window that is this long, because then your Englands, your South Africas, your West Indies, your Zimbabwe's, your South Africas, they're not going to be able to play bilateral cricket against those other teams. They're going to have to prioritise the bigger series because they won't have enough time to cram in all of these leagues. So absolutely think there should be an IPL window. I think it should be shorter and sharper. And I still think it can be as prestigious. But at the moment, the Turkey is, the BCCI, and they're not going to vote for Christmas because it's too big a payday for them.
Thanks, Kimmy. Just to pick up on your point there around globalization, I'm not going to descend into real talk and get sort of...
I missed real talk, though. I haven't had real talk in like 4 or 5 weeks. I've really missed it.
Negative. But Binksy's 100% right. We talk about globalization of this tournament, but...
Don't often hear that.
And the pod.
But this tournament, I feel, is for Indians in India, or Indians abroad as well.
And that's actually totally fine.
That is fine, but the real illustrative point of that is that in New Zealand, we didn't have a rights deal until the 2 days before the tournament started.
Yeah.
And even then, the barriers to watch it were so great that I don't know anyone on this podcast who subscribed to the channel to enable to watch it. We would watch it on other forms of being able to watch it. But I think
all legal, we should
all legal,
yeah,
100%.
of course.
But I don't think that scenario will have played out in most countries around the world. I feel like Australia, England, all South Africa,
And it's on at a shit time in England as well.
Aside from Asia, I think that a lot of the focus, people are going to watch more of the World Cup than they did of the IPL. I think that, going forward, if you look at it from a global perspective.
Those numbers would be interesting. Yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just, that would be fascinating to see.
Awesome. Well, that segues nicely with mention of the World Cup. We'll be back in your feeds to preview the T20 World Cup. That does wrap up our IPL.
I think we should just actually wrap up by saying KKR was awesome. Like
I was literally just about to do that, but you carry on.
No, you do it then, because I do. Well, look, I'm hearing it again now.
Your team.
They have been fantastic. They were so dominant throughout this tournament. I know we talked about it for the first 10 minutes of the show, but all the points, it's been a great chat. But I think the overwhelming thing of this, as this tournament went on, it's just been so impressed by KKR, and I gave them no show at the start. So I'm super impressed with what they've done.
Fantastic.
Well done, Binksy, for picking them.
Yeah, well done, Binksy.
Congratulations. That's what you really wanted.
Thanks, boys. That is the end of the Top Order Podcast IPL review show. I don't even have to do my own publicity. It's brilliant. We will be back in your feed with our T20 World Cup preview, where we will look at all 4 groups, all 20 teams in passing. We're not going to go into detail on every single one, but we will give our runners and riders and our tips as well. They've been right in this IPL, so get onto Odds Checker. Because we're going to give you the gravy in our T20 World Cup preview. But it is now good night and good bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you on the next episode. See you later.